Welcome to this evening's satsang. My name is Durga Leela. I am a regular at Yogaville teaching both Ayurveda and Yoga of Recovery. And tonight I'm going to give a brief introduction to Yoga of Recovery. And this is a course we're about to open online. So we always like to make a personal invitation to our Yogaville and Integral Yoga guests and students. Usually we'd be there in person, and we have been for over a decade. Currently we're online, soon to be back live, I'm sure, at Yogaville. So Healing the Habits That Bind, Yoga of Recovery is about how we can bring in the healing modalities of yoga and Ayurveda to help people establish, maintain, and evolve into a long-term pathway of recovery or sobriety or emotional stability. It is also something that we want to use to help us overcome the self-negating behaviors that are a large contributing factor to the chronic lifestyle diseases that we see now in our society, which the disease-based medicine model of the Western allopathic model struggles to deal with, because they are very, very set up to deal with acute care rather than the chronic diseases. So the lifestyle factor is where yoga and Ayurveda can make a huge contribution, which is very much needed. So in this, many people speak to me, and firstly, the first thing they'll ask me is, what is addiction? And that's something that I struggle to give a succinct answer to. So I like to make this statement and see where people feel into this statement for themselves in their own life. Our understanding of our suffering defines the nature of our solution. And that's a statement that I saw in a book called Meditations from the Mat by Rolf Gates. And it's a perfect way to bring in a discussion of a solution for our addictiveness, because there's a large majority of people that suffer with addictiveness, but would never call themselves an addict, would never reach out for either a 12-step program or any other recovery pathway, or even a rehab, which is for the few. But there's still an addictiveness to their suffering. So the next thing is, think for yourself, what is addiction? What's your definition of addiction? I think it helps to think about that, because many of our lives have been impacted by addiction, and it looks different in many cases. And so therefore, a lot of the questions that I'm asked is, when you're doing something that is somewhat of an issue, it's a little bit of a problem for you, you understand it's not your best habit, but when does it push into, now it's an addiction? And I don't know there's any hard and fast line for that. I do have some definitions of addiction that I particularly like. One is from Deepak Chopra, and that says, when more is never enough. When more is never enough. Gabor Mate phrases it similarly when he says it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. David Frawley says we are seeking the eternal in the transient. And there is an expanded definition of addiction that brings in the fields that are involved in the problem of addiction or our addictiveness. And I think it's worth saying these, because usually it brings a smile to people's faces, because it is such a widespread community problem. And there's so many people trying to deal with it. And this will be in comparison to what we're going to see as the definition from the Western medical model, which is a biochemical model, a model that operates mostly at the level of the physical body. So addiction is a bio, psycho, social, emotional, spiritual, cultural, economic, political disease. Bio, psycho, social, emotional, spiritual, cultural, economic, political disease. So therefore, its tentacles are very widespread in our communities. There is one definition of addiction that I really do like, and it comes from Gabor Mate in his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which is an excellent book. And his voice of compassion comes across very clearly. And he says there is one addiction process. So those are the three very important words. One addiction process. Lethal substance dependencies or frantic self-soothing of overeaters or shopaholics, the obsessions of gamblers, sexaholics, and compulsive internet users, or the socially acceptable and even admired behaviors of the workaholic. So as I invite you to sit with that extended definition of the one addiction process, then maybe you're going to see that in some sense, a lot of our cultural guidance moves us towards our own addictiveness. There's one more that I like, and this comes from spending a lot of time in presentations by experts in addiction who spend an awful lot of time telling us about statistics. And this one is my statistic, which is addiction is a significant social plague. And when you are involved in addiction, life feels kind of miserable and becomes almost impossible to make the right move. Sometimes it feels impossible to even get help. A lot of people use the words, they feel helpless, they feel hopeless. So any conversation we can have with people who are suffering at this level, both for the addictiveness within themselves or the addictions around them that are causing chaos and confusion within their own family and community systems, it's going to be a worthwhile conversation. And I'm very glad that it is part of the Yogaville offerings and has been for years. And so we've had hundreds of people come through this program at the ashram. And extended on that, it is now part of the integral yoga therapy program. So as we know, with the gaps in our healthcare, many people who are attracted to yoga as a spiritual path are now also taking the study with Yogaville and bringing it to a community conversation about this lifestyle aspect of the chronic diseases. So we're introducing the very practical aspects of yoga, the therapeutic aspect of yoga, to bring people to greater advance within their sadhana, whatever faith they may be. But we can't be too deep in our sadhana if we are suffering at the mind-body level. It's an obstacle. So in saying all this about the definitions, I want to give the definition from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. Addiction is a chronic relapsing brain disease that causes compulsive substance use despite harmful consequences. It is considered a brain disease because drugs change the brain. They change its structure and how it works. These brain changes can be long-lasting and can lead to the harmful behaviors seen in people who abuse drugs, often require repeated treatments and require a level of continuous care or support in order to be successful. So I'm interested in that because, one, it describes the current diagnosis, which is from the brain disease model of addiction, which is in short BDMA, brain disease model of addiction. But it does mention repeated treatments. It does mention continuous care and support for success. And it is actually quite difficult to even receive the initial care and support from the Western medical model in the sense of what treatment is actually available for people with addictions that bring them to the point where they do need a detox or a rehab. The continuous care, I think, is part of what Yoga of Recovery offers, which is a continuum of care. So we do not deal with that initial getting someone sober or off of drugs generally. We are thankful and grateful for the work of the Western medical model. And we'd also like to add value and sustainability to that great work that they do by having these grassroots community conversations going on by people who are trained in how to apply both yoga therapeutically and add the practical aspects of Ayurveda, which is the science of life. And that's definitely what we need, a little bit of self-knowledge, a little bit of life knowledge as we navigate the weapons of mass distraction that surround us. This National Institute of Drug Abuse then goes on to talk about treatment medications are being developed, and there are 3 levels of treatment medication. First one is for treating withdrawal. And you might think to yourself, well, do I agree with that? Is that a good idea? Again, this is the medical establishment. They do have quite a reliance on pharmaceutical interventions. Generally, some people would not be able to detox off of a substance or alcohol or drugs without some kind of pharmaceutical support. It may be actually life-threatening for them to do so in the advanced acute stages. There's also treatment medications for staying in treatment. Again, there is a question about how long treatment should be. There's a sort of classic 28-day model, which isn't really proved statistically that is the actual timeline of initial recovery. Many people think more 90 days. In truth, many people are beginning to understand it to be closer to 1 year, but that would involve different levels of residential rehabilitation and detox, along with maybe some sober living and intensive outpatient care. So again, these models are being adapted and developed at the Western medical model. The third treatment is for preventing relapse, and I should say the third medication. So this level of medication is for preventing relapse, and the National Institute of Drug Abuse goes on to tell us that science has taught us that stress, cues linked to the drug experience, e.g., people, places, things, moods, and exposure to drugs are the most common triggers for relapse. Medications are being developed to interfere with these triggers to help patients sustain recovery. So in all honesty, it's this level of medication that raises my interest and raises me to spend the last 20 years developing the work of Yoga of Recovery with the strong and stable support of the ashrams of both Yogaville and Integral Yoga, and also Shivananda and the yoga therapy schools that have set up, so that we can have people trained to have responsive, invitational, current, accessible conversation about how we can contribute to the triggers for relapse. Because if you heard what they are, stress, and then cues linked to the drug experience, people, places, things, moods. So if you were to give one word for that, my one word is life. Life is the trigger for relapse. So we must be alert to the idea that we are to be medicated for life, especially because there is the idea of, from the Vedic system, that the mind is addictive in its own nature, especially with the raga, dvesha, the kleshas of strongly running after what we like and strongly running away from what we do not like. So running toward pleasure, running away from pain. And so those two things mean we're running all the time, but it generally shows an addictive tendency of our mind. especially the untrained mind. And we generally have an untrained mind. It is a super instrument, but it's not well trained. And yoga trains the mind. It is primarily working with our psychology and our emotions. And so therefore, what Yoga of Recovery proposes is a level of medicine to be added to the Western medical model as a continuum of continuous care. And I have formed this in Yoga of Recovery, Healing the Habits That Bind. We name it as the 6 tenets of Yoga of Recovery. The 6 tenets are life is longing, life is prana, life is relationship, life is sweet, life is love, and life is progress. And when I talk about this, I like to call it the medicine of. So for life is longing, I call it the medicine of spirit, remembering spirit, our true essential nature. For life is prana, I call it the medicine of the life force. For life is relationship, it is the medicine of connection. For life is sweet, it is the medicine of TLC, which is tender, loving care. And I like to say it's TLC, not THC, because there's a bit of a national craze that a certain herb, cannabis, is the medicine for the people. And certainly that is a medicine used by Ayurveda, but it is not one of the ones that is strongly favored. So there's a bit of a backlash with it's been restricted and now it's available, and maybe some people are actually overusing that substance in the name of medicine. And there is a very good talk on that on YouTube with Robert Svoboda, and it's 5 minutes with Robert Svoboda on cannabis or maybe marijuana. You can look at that. Life is love is the medicine of liberation and or freedom. And life is progress is the medicine of cumulative change. So all of these bring in conversations that are part of the addictive spectrum that we have, and part of the hotly debated topics within that spectrum of when a drug is illegal or legal, when is recovery, is it harm reduction, is it abstinence? There's so many topics, but because both yoga and Ayurveda are people-oriented systems of care, we can embrace all of that and invite the person into what we call looking into their own narrative, but we are presenting it from a roots level rather than the symptoms. So looking at the addictive behavior from the roots, treating the roots, not the symptoms, and understanding that it is our nature as humans to create narrative. So to heal that story, we allow the story to be told. That's important. We as healers listen deeply to the story, and then we help the person reweave the story. And when we say reweave the story, what we're looking for is the invitation where they are available, where they are willing to embrace what each tenet points to. So each tenet points to the yoga pathway, its perspective and its practices that best allow us to express the inherent energy that we're hearing in that narrative in a more conscious way. So this is with more internal awareness, excuse me, rather than externalized distractions and fixes. So each tenet points to one or two yoga pathways, or for instance, an Ayurveda, like 5 sense therapy model. So in general, what yoga of recovery is, it is a complete reframing of the addiction problem and solution according to the Vedic perspective, allowing us to see our current involvement in the one addiction process that is alive and well within most of us, And as we do that, we discover that in the identification of the problem lies its natural solution. So what I mean by that is, it is well known that underneath most addiction, there is a relational problem at the level of people. Some people are now calling addiction an attachment disorder, but it is about our relational life, our emotional ability to communicate and connect and be with each other. So the underlying word for that is codependency underlies most of the addictive acting out behaviors. We cover that in both Life is Longing and Life is Relationship. And most particularly what we're identifying is that there is a yoga of relationships. It's called Bhakti Yoga. And so therefore, we look at relationships at different levels within yoga of recovery. So we look at the relationship with our own self, and that is greatly helped by the Ayurveda constitutional model. And I've covered that deeply within the Yoga of Recovery book. And also we cover that more in depth in the Yoga of Recovery course, which is called Between the Mat and the Meeting. So we really go into embodying our recovery. And that's by establishing a relationship with our own self, also our relationship with others. And that is greatly helped by, it is helped by the Ayurveda model, that we begin to understand the divine manifesting through all these different 5 elements and the stress reactions of the people around us. So some people becoming more angry, some people becoming more anxious, some people becoming more withdrawn under stress. So if we can recognize that, we can relate better to other people. But in truth, the highest possible solution is from the Bhakti path, which is to form a relationship with our own sense of divinity. And so with Bhakti, that asks us to form an intimate relationship with the God that we feel in our own hearts, and something that can really be there for you, creating an intimate friendship or an intimate system of guidance that you have with something that represents the higher powers of the planet, so that you are never alone in this suffering. And of course, that is strongly represented by satsanga. And I have to say, when we go to teach Life is Relationship, we turn to the teaching of Swami Satchidananda as the most succinct, direct, and impactful way to share Life is Relationship, because we talk about the idea of isolation being one of the primary problems of the addiction as it progresses, that we stop showing up, we will isolate ourselves, and the bad behavior will be unacknowledged by other people, will be hiding. There'll be secrets and lies and shame and guilt. So one of the first major steps towards healing is when we admit we have a problem and we ask for help and we accept help. And so that is when the I turns to we. So the best way to represent Life as Relationship is to speak of the illness and the wellness, and how beautifully Swami Satchidananda says the I of the illness is the I of the ego self, the separate self, and the we of the wellness is the idea of the we of the satsanga, the community. And to know that as you suffer from this addictiveness that many of us do, this one addiction process, you are not alone. And therefore, a large part of the healing of addictiveness comes from satsanga, company of the wise, the company of the truth or wisdom seekers. And so that's an important part, and so beautifully given to us by Swami Satchidananda. So the idea is identifying this is we don't want more stigma or shame attached to this issue, because most of us are suffering from it in some way. In Yoga of Recovery, we actually make the statement that the 2 base attachments or acting out that we have is towards food and people. So we can talk about eating disorders, or we can talk about disordered eating, which is almost a national pastime in a way. And then the big aspect of how we struggle in our relationships at all levels. So how can we be supported in having healthy relationships that are not overly dependent, not codependent, but some sense of interdependency that is healthy. So loving each other, but allowing ourselves to detach and understand that there's a process of self-realization, there's a process of service, but without caretaking, enabling, or doing for the other what they could do for themselves. So it's an interesting thing, and it's a big aspect of where we are in a longer term recovery pathway as we work with peer support groups, that we are able to detach with love, that we're able to share a solution without having to caretake the person's every step and choice. So there's great activity and there's great detachment. A lot of service is happening out here in our community. So in truth, a person bears a great burden when they have self-destructive behavior. So inwardly, they have a lot of self-loathing at the strongest word, but a lot of self-rejection. So we need someone to be able to listen to them with gentleness and compassion, validate their struggle, and then also challenge them to step forward into the power that they truly are, and not be a victim of like an inherent pitfall of the human condition. So therefore, yoga recovery invites us to an investigation of a solution for who we are today, wherever we are in our recovery journey. It is a conversation about our one addiction process. So it brings the people together, the players together, the codependents, along with the substance use disordered people, along with the gamblers and the eating disorders, everyone together in the same room. And then it is a process of self-inquiry. And I like to say creative self-inquiry. One of the other things that I think is important, especially as we situate ourselves alongside the acute care model of allopathy, Western medical system, is that rather than pathologizing every aspect of our being, the 6 tenets are designed to recognize what is the seeking behind the actual acting out behavior. Because there is pain, there is unprocessed emotions or trauma in many people's lives. And what they're doing with addictive behavior is the solution, the only thing that they can think to medicate their pain away, like in this moment. And that pain is real. And they are doing the best they can with the tools that they have. But for someone who understands them at a deeper level, so the people who are trained from the life science system and the unity system that is yoga, we can understand the almost as Nishala Joy Devi says, the namaste effect, that we can see the light of consciousness within them. And that intelligence is seeking its source. And so there's many weapons of mass distraction, and many of us are caught up in them. But the healing conversation is held by the person who can remember that light of consciousnness. So in saying all that, we are viewing the person with the addictions as a seeker. And so what they are seeking with us is named as, they are seeking unity, vitality. They're seeking connection or belonging. And they are seeking beauty, true power, and guidance. Guidance is also given as good, orderly direction. And so good, orderly direction is God. And that is one of the things that we're doing in Yoga of Recovery. We are constantly reframing the God principle in a way that makes it palatable to the person who is in need of the help. So not everyone is open to the idea of a personalized aspect of divinity. So therefore, for instance, in Life is Prana, we offer the higher power concept as healing prana or healthy prana. And so using the tools of the Raja Yoga pathway, asana and pranayama, which many people would be open to receive to help them, heal, to help them feel better, to help them feel able to move through their day. So again, we're not trying to foist anything upon someone. We're listening to the narrative to hear where there is an invitation in the many and multi-layered aspects of help that we can offer people from this vast healing system that recognizes all the different multi-layered aspects of our being. So our physical body, our energy body, our mind, emotions, our intellect, beliefs, and also the idea of the joy, the ananda, the bliss aspect of our being, all of those layers. So we can take it way beyond the biochemical model that is the Western system. But again, the Western system does offer a great acute care model that generally we are not involved in. We're more the continuum of care. So there is each of the tenets pointing to the different pathways of yoga. Life is Longing, for instance, is pointing to Jnana Yoga, Vedanta, and also Bhakti Yoga. Life is Progress is actually pointing to the law of karma and the law of dharma. So to understand that even although we do take up a recovery pathway and we change our ways, that doesn't mean that we're going to be living in a rose garden from here on in. There is still some karmas that will be manifesting and will be a challenge to us. So it's a conversation that needs some time. And that's why online we have created the Unpacking the 6 Tenets of Yoga of Recovery 2x2. So here's some of the things that we have to support people to glimpse into this conversation and perhaps join us. So we have a Yoga of Recovery book that was published on the 19th of May this year. That is mostly covering Ayurveda for our addictiveness. We also have an opportunity for you to join us on the second Saturday of each month. So the next second Saturday that we have is Saturday, the 13th of August. And you can go to the yogaofrecovery.com website. And so again, it's Yoga of Recovery. And there you can register for that class for free. It's a Zoom class. It's online. It's about 90 minutes to 2 hours. And there we introduce a small aspect of the educational piece of Yoga of Recovery. We have some sharing and discussion. Then we have some asana practice, perhaps some pranayama practice. So a little bit of all of those. That's free registration. And then if you are able to, you are welcome to make a donation as well. That is all available for you on the website. And then inviting you in, perhaps from the book, perhaps from the second Saturday, or you're already enrolled in the Yogaville Integral Yoga Therapy training, and it's part of your training hours that we are opening on the 22nd of August for Yoga of Recovery, unpacking the 6 tenets of longing and relationship. So unpacking those 2 tenets to start with. And we're going live on that from the 11th of September. And then the next course, Sweet and Love, opens on the 22nd of October. We're live on that from the 5th of November. And then the next one, Prana and Progress, opens on the 22nd of December. And we're live on that from, I think it's in February. And I wanted to say that one of the ways that we're helping people to access the training, and one of my meditation instructions was remove all barriers to entry. So sometimes the barrier to entry was the date that I happened to be at a particular ashram, but also the airfare and the accommodation fee, and also the course fee. So right now what we've done, and we were lucky enough to receive a grant for the last course from Banyan Botanicals community grant. And Banyan Botanicals is a company that was started up by two students of Vasant Lad. And for over 2 decades, they've been creating sustainable, organic, Ayurvedic formulas and herbs. And I've always used them, so it was very nice to receive the grant from them. It was $1,800. So what I did was I created a partial scholarship fund. So I took 1/3 of the course fee from the Banyan grants. I myself gave 1/3, and the student themselves had to pay the other 1/3. And I was happy to be able to bring in a student called Mercy, who was Swami Ramananda had emailed me and said Mercy had expressed an interest. And she had taken the BIPOC yoga teachers training with Kelly Palmer and all the other teachers at the Integral Yoga in San Francisco, I believe. And so it's lovely to feel that we can add something to the conversations of this, making yoga accessible at our modern culture level and making sure everybody feels invited with none of these obstacles or barriers to entry. And it takes a village to create that. So we are very happy to have Mercy with us. And one of the ways that we are thinking that we can continue this invitation is something called the Pass It On program. So people who have someone in recovery in their own life, or someone who perhaps didn't make it, because not everyone does make it into recovery. In my own life, I've had a niece that died of a heroin overdose. And so in honor of those, and to, allow us to express our love and dedication to those that we have lost. Some we have lost, they've died in recovery, so they have many decades of recovery under their belt. If you have someone like that, we would be happy to recognize them. So for a minimum donation of $250, we can create a partial scholarship in the name of your loved one. And you can be in touch with me. And there's a donate button on the Yoga Recovery site. And as we create these, we'll offer them out as partial scholarships. So again, $250 is 1/3 of the one course fee. So upcoming Longing in Relationship, $250 will bring someone in where they will only have to pay $250 themselves. And then I fund the other part. So a collaboration to bring more people in. We are generally all needing to counter our health negating lifestyle habits. So therefore, Yoga Recovery invites everyone in. You can sign up through the Yogaville website. So whilst I am not teaching live, Yogaville is able to participate in the Yoga Recovery programs. So each person that signs up through Yogaville or Integral Yoga, we also donate to the center and the ashram. And so we are moving through from September. The course opens in August, and we're going all the way through till I think the end of March next year. So it's paced. You have access for 1 year. You'll meet other people. There's weekly aspects of the program, which is an open all fellowship 12-step meeting. Also, there is weekly a book discussion group. So there's ways to stay connected. There's ways to just move through it to get the education for your yoga training hours. Some of the sessions are optional. So just a way to bring us together in both learning and education in the system of medicine that is yoga and Ayurveda, to make it accessible and relevant and current to this topic of conversation, in the hope that you will be able to steady yourself on a recovery pathway, or to constrain some of those addictive tendencies within yourself, and that you would be able to share that out with other people in your community and family. Thank you for inviting me to speak at Satsang tonight. We have a question and answer session tomorrow, which is Sunday, the 24th of July. And I believe it's at PM. I'll have that clarified, but it's a question and answer session. So if you have questions about anything that I've spoken about here this evening, I'll be live tomorrow for 1 hour with the Yogaville, and there'll be a sign up for that. So wonderful to be with everybody. Hari Om.